Well, coming up on today's show, more stories of super long mileage EVs, turning light poles into EV chargers, and a first look at the Mercedes-Benz EQC powertrain. Well, good morning, good afternoon and good evening, wherever you are in the world. Hello and welcome to the Friday the 17th of August edition of EV News Daily. It's Martyn Lee here with the news you need to know about electric cars and the move towards sustainable transport. I want to say a heartfelt thank you to the 61 patrons of this podcast whose generosity means I get to keep making this show, which aims to entertain and inform thousands of listeners every day about a brighter future. Well, I love these stories of electric cars doing exceptionally high mileages because it's something that most of us won't ever get to do, and it's often these shuttle companies that rack up these miles. Another one from Tesloop right now. They're based out of Hawthorne in California. They have Tesla Model S and Model X cars, and this story coming from our friends at Inside EVs. You can check them out at insideevs.com. And once again, it's another high mileage car that's been ferrying people around the West Coast. This time it's a Tesla Model X, a 90D, and it's named Dewey. And it's now officially crossed the 300,000 mile mark. And how's it holding up? Well, incredibly well. It was built in May of 2016. Tesloop have been using it ever since. And it's interesting that how they haven't exactly been following the guidance from Tesla. Inside EV says that while Tesla recommends owners don't exceed a charge of more than 80% if you're doing your daily driving, the guys at Tesloop regularly fill up their entire fleet of EVs, not just once, but 4 times a day, up to 95% of full battery capacity when they're doing their shuttle service. That Model X is one of those cars that when they bought it was grandfathered in for life of free supercharging. Now, you can't do that now. You can't launch an equivalent of a Tesloop because you can't now use those Tesla superchargers for those commercial activities, but they can and still do. Well, how much has the battery been degrading? Well, Inside EV say that high voltage battery deg is both a worry and a real life issue for any EV car owner. However, after 2 years of ultimate over-utilisation, the battery pack on this particular Model X has only lost 12.6% of its original capacity. That's a range of 214 miles when the charge limit is set to 95%. Additionally, Tesla has noted that their 2016 Model X battery deg has essentially plateaued after about 9 months. The battery deg is kind of really minimal, and it's one of those benefits of driving an electric car. Well, a new article that I spotted in ELE Times listed the top 10 lithium-ion battery manufacturers in the world. And we love a top 10. And it'll be an interesting recap of the biggest 10 battery makers in the world right now. Samsung SDI is at the top of the list, a subsidiary of Samsung. Panasonic, of course, very famous for making the tech and the batteries for Teslas. Toshiba are high on the list as well, and they're doing huge investment in R&D in lithium technology at Toshiba. LG Chem is a name that we talk about a lot on the podcast, making lots of batteries for the kind of cars that you and I will be driving over the next months and years as well. Tesla are listed in the top 10 battery makers. So Gigafactory 1 in Nevada in the US, of course, Panasonic, their partner there to actually make the batteries. And they say that as more gigafactories are built around the world, Tesla will be the ones making the batteries. So we're looking forward to the Shanghai Gigafactory, and there'll be one, according to Elon, on every continent. Europe should be announced by the end of this year. Certainly one down under. Australia's on the cards as well, and more all around the world. An American firm, A123 Systems, are manufacturing nanophosphate lithium-ion batteries. They rank high on the list as well. And eCobalt Solutions are based in Canada, and they've positioned their lithium-ion technology towards the renewable energy sector. Well, BYD is one of those huge Chinese names that we talk about a lot on the podcast as well, offering their lithium-ion battery technology mainly to the automobile industry. CATL, the Contemporary Amperex Technology Limited Company. Again, we talk about them on the podcast a fair bit because they're making a serious amount of batteries. And finally, a name that I haven't really come across in kind of recent stories would be Johnson Controls. They are one of the biggest lithium-ion battery manufacturers in the world. So big, they say, that nearly 35% of lithium-ion batteries in the global EV market are currently being produced by Johnson Controls, which is kind of a new stat on me, being used in passenger vehicles, commercial vehicles, recreational vehicles. I'm definitely going to be doing a bit more research tonight over the weekend into that company just to up my knowledge a little bit. Well, Jason Platts from Smart Cities Dive has picked up on a fantastic story, and congratulations to the Berlin-based Tricity, because they've won an award. They've been named the winner of the first NYCX Climate Action Challenge for its technology. What Tricity do is they convert existing light poles into EV charging stations. The company's going to launch a pilot in New York City with the potential for a multi-year demonstration project, putting Tricity chargers around the city. The company's technology installs outlets on lampposts, allowing drivers to charge their cars. The retrofit technology already being used here in the UK and has indeed been reported on here on this podcast before, also being used in Germany and France. The New York City test will mark the very first American use. Well, congratulations again to Tricity, beating out nearly 36 companies for the Climate Challenge. 6 finalists were named a couple of months ago in June and awarded $13,000 for their technology. An interesting thing about Tricity as well, when we spoke to one of the leaders of a company called Urban Electric, they are going to be doing something slightly different. They are doing pop-up chargers in the street. So obviously lampposts are only however so many meters on the street. They're quite well spaced out, and in the future on-street parking will require a lot of EVs charging at once. Well, Urban Electric want to put pop-up chargers in many places down streets as a way of solving on-street parking. There's an interview on the archive section of this podcast if you want to go check them out. And interesting that what they're able to do is use Tricity's platform, as it were, for things like billing and card payments and processing. So I wonder if more people will be doing that as Tricity grow. One of the recent success stories in this country, and one of the newcomers, I guess you would call them, is InstaVolt here in the UK. And they do DC fast chargers, and a lot of people like their technology because they do the whole kind of tap and go. They do contactless payment. You haven't got to have the membership cards and all those kind of things. You can just turn up to an InstaVolt charger, tap your card, and your charge starts. But one of the things that I think is interesting is they are putting them in forecourts, places where cars have traditionally gone to put energy, to put fuel into their vehicles. So rather than focusing on, and they do things like destinations like gyms, but also they are putting them in places like forecourts, and that's an interesting behaviour where a lot of EV owners are thinking, well, we charge overnight, we charge at destinations where we're going when we go shopping or to the gym, rather than having to go to this dedicated place like at the moment where you have to go and fill up because that's where the tanks of petrol and diesel are stored underground. Well, they're having some success doing that, and I'm not sure about which model is going to win or whether it'll be a combination of models that eventually people do, but they're putting more and more of these rapid chargers into forecourts. There's about 162,000 electric cars on the roads here in the UK, and about 5,500 plug-in vans as well, and about 17,000 charge points across the country. Well, how you own your next EV is an interesting question. Many people saying that you utterly should lease an electric car because the technology is changing so quickly that you don't want to be left in 3 or 4 years' time with a car on your hands that is enormously outdated. Some people tend to do the personal contract plan, which is different to leasing. It's where you maybe have a little balloon payment at the end, where if you want to buy the car, you can. If not, you can hand it back. Other people prefer just to maybe get a traditional loan, and some people are lucky enough to have the cash just to go and buy a brand new car or even a used EV. Well, how you get your next one is something that's on the minds of an electricity company, an energy supplier here called OVO Energy here in the UK, and they popped a little post on their own OVO Energy forum, which I happened to stumble across, and I'll just read this out. This is from Darren, who's the community manager at OVO, and he says this: imagine a world where your energy supplier is offering you one exciting bundle. One where you can lease an electric vehicle from your energy provider alongside your energy supply. They'll add in insurance and membership for a charging network, and you pay for all of your energy and your mobility in one bill, like a bundle. He says it might even get you a discount on a home charger which is installed as well. He says if OVO or another energy company was to offer a bundle like this, we'd love to know, would it be something you're interested in, and what would you need to consider before opting into a bundle like this as opposed to buying all the services from different providers? Give us your thoughts below. And there's some replies on there. Some people saying it's a brilliant idea. Some people saying I want to own my own EV rather than leasing. It doesn't feel like, I'm like washing my car on a Sunday. It's like really my car if you're leasing it. And some people saying it's heading in the right direction. What do you think? I'd love to know from you. you? What's your ideal model for owning your next electric vehicle? Well, you can leave a comment in the YouTube section or on Facebook, or send an email and I'll read it out. The email address is hello@evnewsdaily.com. Well, moving on to a story that I saw on Electric, and they are probably best known for having insights into Tesla stories, but they do cover lots of other EV stories as well. And this one's all about the Mercedes EQC, and Mercedes have been showing off some EV technology. Not the full Mercedes EQC, I should add, that hasn't been revealed just yet, but the vehicle's powertrain, what some people call the skateboard, has been on show at their Bremen factory during an event for its 40th anniversary. The drive units are fairly compact and located on the axles, of course dual motor for four-wheel drive. Mercedes-Benz released a new teaser for the EQC recently, which did include a bit of a look at the new powertrain. Mercedes-Benz said they plan to bring the vehicle to production next year, but they could also unveil the production version of the SUV in coming months. I'll put a link to the Electric article in the show notes if you want to read more. Well, nearly 130 years ago, German inventor Andreas Flocken was working on a prototype that attracted attention in Coburg, a small town in Bavaria. It was September the 28th, 1888, that a local newspaper wrote about a steam chase in Flocken's workshop that should arouse great interest after completion. This is according to Wolfgang Köhler, writing for The Verge. He says that obviously the author didn't understand what kind of chase he had seen in Flocken's garage. It was nothing to do with steam. What the inventor was doing was building the first electric car in the world. It was made mostly of wood back then and weighed 900 pounds. The maximum speed was a heady 9 miles an hour. And later that year in 1888, the inventor would set out for his very first test drive in the world's very first electric car, and it was a success. Took 2.5 hours, and he only went 16 miles down the road. But the battery, well, that didn't survive so well. And The Verge say that all these years later, German car makers are still having trouble with their batteries. The problem being, even though the German manufacturers are starting to make some really attractive and desirable electric cars, the likes of Mercedes, VW, BMW, of course, the batteries inside them are pretty much coming from suppliers in China and Korea or Japan. Now, Martin Winter is a battery expert, a professor of materials science and energy at the University of Munster, and he says this, and I quote, "Cells can be a major technology differentiator, and cells are by far the most costly part of a battery pack." Now, until 3 years ago, Daimler, or Daimler as I got told off for saying it on YouTube today, someone said, "Don't call it Daimler, it's Daimler." And if I do that, Germans say, "It's not Daimler, it's Daimler." Oh, you make your mind up. They had their own battery cell factory in Saxony. The original plan, say The Verge, was to win other German car manufacturers as partners. They could have produced quantities large enough to make the business profitable, but it didn't work out. Partly at the time, those other German brands 3 years ago just didn't have the appetite to go all in on electric cars. So why would they need so many battery cells? Also rewinding back to look at the headlines of a few years ago, it was when Tesla and Elon Musk were saying we're going to build the Gigafactory out to be the biggest building on planet Earth. 3 years later, there's definitely some winners and there's definitely some losers from those people back then who had the foresight to invest in battery technology. And I should add my own personal comment, it's pretty tough to blame those big German car makers for the decisions made 3 and 5 years ago, because they had the market all to themselves making combustion engines. So why disrupt things on purpose? Why eat into your own business and make electric cars before you really need to? Why be the disruptor? Well, as it turns out, as the years have gone on, other companies have been disruptors and now they're having to play catch up. But why would you? It doesn't make any sense. It does if you have the power to be an Amazon's Jeff Bezos, and if you can be an Elon Musk from Tesla, even if you can be a Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook. Well, you've got that power, that influence, almost that kind of dictatorial relationship over the company, where you can say we're going to have some short-term pain but some really long-term gain. If you're at one of those big car makers 3 or 5 years ago, and I know people sometimes hate me defending them on the podcast, but this is an electric car podcast after all, and some of them have done some pretty sucky things over the years. And it takes a really brave person to say we're going to have 3 to 5 years of short-term pain, but in the long term it'll pay off. It's a hard sell to the board. It's an even harder sell to those shareholders. So The Verge say that fast forward all these years later, and the German car makers are really struggling to play catch up when it comes to cell production. Well, should you buy a used electric car? A new article today says that here in the UK, Britons would pick a used electric car over a used laptop or even a used mobile phone. Well, 75% of Britons say they would happily buy an electric car that was second-hand. It's almost twice as many who said that they would pay for a hand-me-down phone. Insiders believe consumers are becoming increasingly trusting of battery longevity in EVs. More high-profile manufacturers are releasing their models. It's a survey done by Click Mechanic, and they have some advice for those looking for used electric vehicles. I'll put a link to the article in the show notes so you can find out more if you want to. And finally today, it's been a busy news one again today, and finally Shannon Malloy at news.com.au says that analysts released today by a UK company called Go Compare has found that Australia are the worst equipped country for EVs, performing poorly across several of the key measures. Let's find out what they were. Of the 30 nations that the IEA surveyed, Australia has the highest ratio of cars per charging points, that is 15.42 cars per charging points in the country, and yet one of the lowest number of public charging stations. Nationwide, public charging stations, 476. Additionally, there are a shocking 14.3 petrol stations to each publicly accessible electric car charging point. Australia has to be one of the slowest countries to adapt to electric cars. An interesting series of things at play in Australia, a country that is very much politically sold on coal and fossil fuels. And not that much, as I can tell, from the literally the other side of the world, literally the other side of planet Earth. From what I can tell from here, very little political will to move not only towards mass renewables, although there's some big renewable projects happening, and there are some standout politicians that really want to go green, lacking any real political will and drive to move to e-mobility. Aside from some of the outliers like Norway, where EVs are 20% of new car sales, and in some months it can be half of all new months sales being electrified cars. In Australia, it's 0.2%. Now, the average, I would say, when I look at all these surveys around the world, and this is enormously unscientific, and I guess somebody could run the numbers somewhere, what the worldwide EV average is. I'm sure if I spent 2 seconds on a thing called Google, I could find out. It seems like the average would be about 2% worldwide at the moment. You've got the outliers very high, and Australia being an outlier and being very low. Is the demand there in Australia? I occasionally get emails and comments from our listeners down under saying, I've got an EV, it's fine at the minute, I don't see many others. Others, Australians, saying, I would love to buy an EV. I listen to your podcast because you're always super excited about EV technology, and they like how kind of optimistic this podcast is at a time when other people in their country aren't so optimistic about electrified transport. Well, let me know your comments on YouTube, and if you want to email the show, you can, hello@evnewsdaily.com. Yes, I hope that we are always optimistic and positive on this show, and that we go through all the news stories every day online to save you some time. If we do one thing, hopefully it saves you a little bit of time and giving you all the most important things that you need to know. Thank you very much to Matt, by the way. Matt KOVALSKI is a new producer of this show on Patreon. If this is the first time that you've heard me talk about this, by the way, there is a Patreon page at patreon.com/EV News Daily. Launched it about 10 days ago, up to almost 2 weeks ago now. I have certainly been blown away by the generosity of people in terms of funding the work that we are doing to spread the word. So many people who listen to this show may not have an EV yet, but they are EV curious, as a phrase that I picked up from my friend Dimitri at myev.com, and it's a phrase that really sums up so many listeners to this show as well, that they know in the next year to 18 months there will be an EV in their driveway or outside their house or apartment. Just not yet. But if you are thinking of looking at patreon.com/EV News Daily and wanting to be one of the supporters, we are heading towards our first Hot 100 supporters. And if you want to be one of those Hot 100, it would mean the world to me. Well, all the previous podcasts are online right now. There's 213 of them in the archive. They're free and always will be. Please do pass them on to somebody who might be interested. You can get them on iTunes and all the usual podcast places. And if you can leave a little rate and review any of those platforms, that would really help me out. Search EV News Daily to find us on the socials. Have a wonderful day. I'll catch you tomorrow.